My brother's fiancé slid a $6,400 dinner bill across the table and told me I was uninvited to their wedding because my single status ruined her aesthetic. She wanted me to pay for the rehearsal dinner of a wedding I was no longer allowed to attend. She thought I was just a lonely woman who would cry and open her wallet. She had no idea I would soon cancel their luxury honeymoon and legally evict them from the home they thought they owned. My name is Naomi. I am 33 years old and the founder of a corporate event planning agency. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The crystal chandeliers of the Prime Cut Steakhouse cast a warm glow over our private dining table. The rehearsal dinner had just wrapped up. Waiters silently cleared away plates that had held dry-aged ribeyes and butter-poached lobster. I sat at the edge of the table sipping water, exhausted from managing high-profile corporate events. I had come to celebrate my younger brother Derek and his beautiful bride, to be Jasmine, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit to blend into her elegant theme. Suddenly, the heavy leather checkbook landed on the crisp white tablecloth. Jasmine pushed it directly toward me with her manicured fingernails. I opened it and saw the total: $6,400. I looked up expecting a joke, but Jasmine was staring at me with a cold, calculated expression. "I am so glad you enjoyed the steak," Naomi Jasmine said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Since you are the successful business owner in the family, Derek and I agreed it would be a beautiful gesture for you to cover the rehearsal dinner. Consider it a down payment on your sisterly duties." A huge dinner bill was not something you just spring on someone. But before I could process the entitlement, Jasmine held up her hand to silence me. "There is one more thing," she continued, her tone shifting to icy. "We have been looking at the seating chart for tomorrow. Derek and I have made a difficult decision. We think it is best if you do not attend the wedding tomorrow." The clinking of silverware around the table seemed to stop. I stared at her, my mind struggling to comprehend. "I am uninvited to the wedding?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "But you just handed me the bill for the rehearsal dinner." Jasmine sighed heavily, rolling her eyes. "Naomi, try to see this from my perspective. My family is flying in from Atlanta. My parents are bringing country club friends. Half of my Instagram followers are waiting for the exclusive wedding content. You showing up alone, single, and looking so corporate just does not fit the high society aesthetic I have curated. It is an exclusive vibe. You sitting alone looking pathetic is going to bring down the energy of the room." I turned my gaze to my brother. "Derek," I said softly, "you are letting her ban me from your wedding the night before." Derek shifted uncomfortably, but did not meet my eyes. Instead, he raised his left arm casually, adjusting the heavy gold watch on his wrist. It was an $8,000 Rolex. The exact Rolex I purchased for him 2 years ago when he graduated college because our parents could not afford a decent gift. He wore it like a badge of honor, a symbol of wealth he had not earned. "Come on, Naomi," Derek mumbled, fiddling with the watch I paid for. "Try to be understanding. Jasmine has a vision for her big day. Her guest list is full of influencers and local celebrities. You have to admit you do not really fit into that crowd. We just want everything perfect for the cameras. Plus, you already promised you would take care of the dinner bill tonight. Do not make a scene." I looked back and forth between them. Jasmine sat there with a smug smile, fully expecting me to burst into tears, write the check, and walk away in shame. Derek was already signaling the waiter, completely detached from the cruelty of what he had just done. They genuinely believed I was a weak, desperate woman who would endure any disrespect to maintain the illusion of family harmony. They thought my love for my brother was a blank check they could cash whenever they wanted. They were about to learn a very hard lesson about the reality of the cold money they loved so much. I slowly shifted my gaze away from Derek and looked across the table at my parents. My father Richard was busy inspecting his empty wineglass, pretending the sudden tension in the room had nothing to do with him. My mother Susan, however, was glaring right at me. Her lips were pressed together into a thin white line. I waited for her to say something to intervene and remind Derek that family was supposed to stick together. I waited for her to tell Jasmine that uninviting her own daughter from the wedding was unacceptable. Instead, my mother let out a loud, exasperated sigh that echoed in the quiet dining room. She carefully placed her linen napkin on the table and leaned forward. Her eyes were hard and completely devoid of any sympathy. "Naomi, please do not make a scene here," Susan whispered harshly. "People are starting to stare, and we absolutely cannot afford to look like some low-class dysfunctional family tonight. Jasmine has a very specific vision for her wedding, and you need to respect that." I stared at the woman who raised me. "You cannot be serious," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "She just told me I am banned from the wedding, and she expects me to pay for this $6,000 dinner. And you are telling me to respect her vision." My mother did not even flinch. She reached over and patted Jasmine on the arm in a sickening display of solidarity. "Jasmine is marrying into this family tomorrow, Naomi. Her parents are very prominent members of the community in Atlanta. They have connections that could really help Derek launch his career. We need to make a good impression on them and their friends. You sitting there looking miserable and single is not going to help anyone. You are just the sister. You need to learn your place and stop trying to make everything about you." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. Just the sister. Learn my place. My father finally looked up from his glass and nodded in agreement. "Your mother is right, Naomi," Richard muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. "Derek is the man of the hour. This is his time to shine. You have your little event planning business, so you are doing fine for yourself. Just pay the bill and go home. We will call you next week when things settle down." My little event planning business. That was how they always described the corporate agency I built from the ground up. The same agency that paid for the very roof over their heads, though they conveniently chose to ignore that fact. To them, my success was only valuable when they needed to withdraw funds. But socially, I was just a walking ATM machine that they wanted hidden in the closet when company came over. Susan leaned back in her chair, looking satisfied that she had put me in my place. "We are a family. Naomi and family make sacrifices for each other," she said, her voice taking on that familiar lecturing tone. "Derek needs this wedding to be flawless. Jasmine needs her aesthetic to be perfect for her social media brand. The least you can do is support them financially if you cannot support them aesthetically. Do not be selfish. Just hand the waiter your credit card and let us enjoy the rest of our evening in peace." I looked around the table at the four of them, Jasmine with her triumphant smirk, Derek admiring his expensive watch, Richard avoiding eye contact, and Susan radiating self-righteous authority. For 33 years, I had played the role they assigned me. I was the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who fixed their messes and funded their lifestyles while demanding nothing in return. They had grown so accustomed to my compliance that they honestly believed I would just swallow this ultimate insult and pay the bill with a smile. They thought the threat of being cast out of the family would break me, but they did not realize that they had just handed me the key to my own cage. By telling me I was no longer welcome, they severed the only invisible string of obligation that kept me tied to their endless demands. They gave me the absolute freedom to finally stop caring. I took a deep breath. The crushing weight of their expectations that I had carried my entire life simply evaporated. I did not feel sad. I did not feel rejected. I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of clarity. I looked right into the eyes of my mother, the eyes of a woman who had just sold out her own daughter. Jasmine tapped her manicured nails impatiently against the leather checkbook. "Well, Naomi, are you going to pay this or not?" Jasmine asked, her voice breaking the silence. She pushed the leather folder another inch toward me. I looked at her, observing the greed in her eyes. I did not cry. My heart did not race. The anxiety that usually paralyzed me around my family was completely gone. In its place was an absolute freezing calm. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out my wallet. I bypassed the standard credit cards and slid out my heavy metal Black American Express card. It made a satisfying clink as I placed it on the bill. Derek stared at the card. He knew exactly what kind of spending requirement was needed to even be invited to carry one. His eyes widened slightly in realization that my business was generating serious wealth. But he said nothing. His greed overpowered his curiosity. I caught a passing waiter and handed him the folder. "Put it all on this card," I said with a polite smile. The waiter nodded and hurried off. The tension at the table instantly evaporated. My mother let out a breath of relief. My father finally sat back in his chair. Jasmine beamed a wide, victorious smile, thinking she had successfully established her dominance as the new queen of the family. "Thank you, Naomi." Jasmine said, her tone suddenly sugary and condescending again. "I knew you would understand. We really appreciate your generosity. It is going to be such a beautiful wedding tomorrow. I will make sure the photographer sends you some nice pictures since you will not be there to see it in person." I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy suit. I looked at Derek. He gave me an awkward half smile, a pathetic attempt to smooth things over now that he had gotten exactly what he wanted. I did not smile back. "You are very welcome," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I hope the two of you have exactly the wedding you deserve. I hope it is everything you both envisioned. Enjoy your special day." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I did not pause at the door. I walked out of the restaurant and stepped into the evening air. The valet brought my car around immediately. I handed him the ticket and slid into the quiet leather interior of my vehicle. I closed the door, shutting out the noise of the street. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, letting reality wash over me. 33 years of being the financial safety net for people who fundamentally despised me. And it was finally over. They had officially uninvited me from their lives. Now it was my turn to uninvite them from the benefits of my hard work. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my iPad. I opened my proprietary agency software, the system I use to book luxury travel for my high-net-worth clients. I bypassed the client files and went straight to my personal account dashboard. There it was, a $25,000 all-inclusive honeymoon package to the Maldives. It featured first-class flights and a 2-week stay in a presidential overwater villa. It was the ultimate dream vacation. I had booked it 3 months ago as my grand wedding gift to them. Because I owned the agency, the reservation was entirely under my master corporate account. I was the purchaser, the agent, and the sole authorized decision-maker. Derek and Jasmine were merely listed as the travel guests. I tapped on the reservation. The full itinerary expanded on my screen, detailing the private seaplane transfers and couples spa treatments. Jasmine had been bragging about this trip to her followers for weeks. I stared at the bright red button at the bottom of the screen labeled Cancel Reservation. According to my agency policies, a cancellation within 48 hours of departure meant a total forfeiture of funds. No refunds, no credits, just a total wipeout. The price of the trip was a cheap fee to pay for my permanent freedom. I pressed the cancel button. A warning prompt popped up asking me to confirm the permanent deletion of the itinerary. I tapped confirm, and the screen displayed a green checkmark. Booking terminated. Flights voided. Villa released back into the resort inventory. I locked my iPad. Back inside the restaurant, Derek and Jasmine were probably celebrating their flawless victory. They had absolutely no idea their luxury honeymoon had just vanished into thin air. I pulled out of the parking lot feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. The next morning, I woke up to the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse apartment. It was Saturday, the day of the wedding. Under normal circumstances, I would have been awake since 5 in the morning. I would have been running around the city picking up last-minute floral arrangements, steaming the bridesmaids' dresses, and handing out cash to vendors who demanded unexpected day of fees. I would have been the invisible stagehand making sure Jasmine had the flawless high society wedding she demanded. But today the apartment was perfectly silent. I stretched in my king-sized bed, feeling the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets against my skin. There was no panic. There was no anxiety. For the first time in my adult life, I was not responsible for managing my family's manufactured crises. I rolled over and picked up my smartphone from the nightstand. The screen was already flooded with notifications. There were text messages from my mother reminding me to wire the money for the rehearsal dinner to her account. There was a passive-aggressive message from Derek asking if I was still going to drop off the bridal party breakfast spread before I disappeared for the day. They truly believed I was still going to serve them even after being banished. I did not bother reading the rest. I held down the power button and watched the screen go black. I tossed the lifeless piece of metal into my bedside drawer. Today was about me. I got out of bed and dressed in comfortable athleisure wear. I called my private driver and gave him the address of the most exclusive wellness sanctuary in the city. It was a luxury day spa that catered strictly to high-net-worth individuals requiring a 6-month waiting list just to secure a membership. I had been a member for 3 years but rarely found the time to actually enjoy it, because my family was always draining my energy and schedule. When I arrived, the concierge greeted me by name and handed me a plush heated robe. The air smelled of eucalyptus and crushed lavender. Soft ambient music played in the background, masking the noise of the busy city outside. I spent the first 2 hours alternating between the Himalayan salt room and the hydrotherapy pools. Every knot in my shoulders, every ounce of tension in my jaw, seemed to dissolve into the warm mineral water. I realized how much physical pain I had been carrying just from the stress of anticipating my family's next demand. After a 90-minute deep tissue massage, I moved to the private relaxation lounge. The room was enclosed in soundproof glass overlooking a private garden. An attendant brought me a tray with fresh green tea and sliced fruit. I sat back in the velvet chaise lounge and pulled my iPad from my tote bag. I connected to the secure network and logged into my corporate banking portal. I did not just own an event planning agency. Over the years, I had quietly funneled my agency profits into a separate entity called Apex Holdings, LLC. I opened the portfolio dashboard and reviewed my assets. My real estate investments were performing perfectly. I scanned the list of commercial spaces and residential properties I had acquired. And right there, listed under my secondary residential assets, was the deed to the townhouse on Elm Street. The same townhouse my parents lived in. The same townhouse Derek and Jasmine were supposed to move into after their wedding. Seeing it listed as a mere line item on my balance sheet reinforced the reality of the situation. I held all the cards. I had built a multi-million-dollar empire in absolute silence, while they maxed out credit cards to look rich on social media. My financial advisor had sent me a secure message regarding a new commercial property acquisition. To approve the transfer, I needed to authenticate the login using my phone. I reluctantly reached into my bag and powered my smartphone back on just to get the security code. The moment the cellular signal connected, the device began to vibrate uncontrollably. The notification chime rang over and over again in rapid succession. I watched the screen light up with a barrage of missed calls. 5 missed calls from Derek, 12 missed calls from my mother, 15 from my father. Even Jasmine had called me several times. In total, there were 45 missed calls spanning the last 3 hours. It was currently 2 in the afternoon. The wedding ceremony was supposed to be starting right now. I looked at the sheer volume of frantic messages and felt absolutely nothing. Whatever disaster was unfolding in their world, it was no longer my problem. I turned it off. I spent the rest of the weekend in complete blissful isolation. Sunday came and went without a single thought about the wedding or the manufactured drama that usually consumed my weekends. By Monday morning, I was back in my corner office overlooking the city skyline. I was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, holding a cup of artisanal coffee and reviewing contracts for an upcoming tech summit. I had instructed my receptionist to hold all personal calls, but I had forgotten to block my family from my direct private line. At exactly 9 in the morning, the phone on my desk began to ring. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Derek flashing across the screen. I took a slow sip of my coffee, placed the cup down, and pressed the speaker button. Naomi, pick up the phone. Derek screamed the second the line connected. His voice was frantic, echoing loudly through my spacious office. I am at JFK Terminal 4 right now, and the Emirates desk agent is telling me our confirmation codes are invalid. He says the tickets do not exist, Naomi. Tell me this is just some kind of system glitch. I leaned back in my leather chair. Hello, Derek, I said calmly. I hope the wedding was everything Jasmine dreamed of. Forget the wedding, Naomi. Derek yelled, his voice cracking with panic. The agent is telling me the entire $25,000 package was voided. The flights, the seaplane transfer, the overwater villa. Everything is gone. They are asking us to step aside because we are holding up the first-class line. Fix this right now. Call your agency and get the tickets reissued immediately. I listened to the desperate entitlement in his voice and felt a wave of pure satisfaction. There is no system glitch, Derek, I replied, keeping my tone professional and detached. I logged into my corporate portal on Friday night and canceled the entire itinerary. You and Jasmine explicitly told me I was not welcome at the wedding. You uninvited me from your lives to protect your high society aesthetic. So I simply uninvited you from the luxury vacation I purchased with my hard-earned money. The gift is revoked permanently. There was a moment of dead silence on the line, followed by the unmistakable sound of a woman having a complete public meltdown. In the background, I could hear Jasmine shrieking at the top of her lungs. What do you mean she canceled it? Jasmine screamed, her voice shrill and echoing through the airport terminal. We are going to the Maldives, Derek. You promised me. I already posted my first-class lounge outfit on Instagram. I tagged the resort. My followers are expecting a 2-week luxury vlog series starting today. My sponsors sent me clothes specifically for this trip. You cannot do this to my brand. Tell that petty, jealous sister of yours to put her credit card back on file right now. Jasmine was practically hyperventilating. I could hear an airport security guard politely but firmly asking them to step away from the premium check-in desk because they were disturbing the actual paying passengers. Derek came back on the line, breathing heavily, sounding utterly defeated. Naomi, please, Derek begged, dropping the aggressive tone and switching to his usual manipulative pleading. Jasmine is crying hysterically. People are filming us with their phones. We look like absolute fools. If you want us to pay you back for the rehearsal dinner, we will figure it out, but you have to reinstate this trip. We tried to just buy economy tickets ourselves, but the Emirates agent said your corporate account flagged the cancellation under a hostile dispute protocol. The resort in the Maldives has completely blacklisted us. They will not even let us book a standard room with our own money. That is standard procedure for my agency when a high-value package is terminated abruptly, I explained smoothly. It protects my business from credit card fraud. You are flagged in their international database. There is absolutely nothing I can do, and even if I could, I would not lift a finger to help you. You made your choice at the steakhouse on Friday. You are doing this just to humiliate us, Derek accused, his voice trembling with helpless rage. You are doing this because you are jealous. Jasmine comes from a better family than we do. I am doing this because I am finally matching your energy, Derek, I said. Have a safe trip back to the townhouse. Oh, and be careful on the subway with that heavy Rolex on your wrist. I reached out and pressed the end call button, cutting off Jasmine's distant screaming. The office was quiet again. I smiled and turned back to my computer monitor, ready to continue my workday. But my peace was short-lived. Less than an hour later, the heavy glass doors of my agency swung open and the real storm arrived. The heavy glass doors of my agency swung open and the real storm arrived. My mother, Susan, marched past the reception desk, completely ignoring my shocked assistant who tried to intercept her. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, and her face was flushed bright red with fury. She did not bother knocking. She simply threw open the frosted glass door to my private office and slammed it shut behind her. The sound echoed off the polished concrete floors. I did not flinch. I carefully placed my silver pen down on my mahogany desk and looked up at her. You are going to fix this right now, Naomi, my mother hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You are going to pick up that phone and get your brother back on that flight to the Maldives. Do you have any idea what you have done? Jasmine is in tears in the middle of the airport. Her parents are calling my cell phone asking why their daughter is being treated like a criminal at the check-in counter. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, interlacing my fingers. Good morning to you too, Mom, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. It is highly inappropriate for you to barge into my place of business like this. If you want a meeting, you speak with my assistant. Otherwise, I must ask you to leave immediately. Susan scoffed, taking a heavy step closer to my desk. Do not use that arrogant tone with me. I am your mother. I do not need an appointment to tell my daughter to stop acting like a vindictive child. You have completely humiliated our family today. You canceled their honeymoon over what? A petty disagreement. You are overreacting as usual, and I will not allow you to ruin your brother's life just because you are bitter. It was not a petty disagreement, I replied calmly. They uninvited me from the wedding because I do not fit Jasmine's aesthetic. They insulted me to my face, and you sat there and told me to accept it. You told me to learn my place. My place is apparently not at their wedding or in their lives. So I removed my financial contribution. It is a very simple concept called consequences. My mother slammed both of her hands flat onto the shiny surface of my desk, leaning over to glare at me. This has nothing to do with the wedding, and you know it, she yelled. This is about your lifelong obsession with ruining anything good that happens to Derek. You have always been jealous of him. Since you were kids, you resented him because we sent him to the private academy while you went to the local public school. You have always hated that we gave him the attention he needed. And now that he has found a beautiful woman from a prominent family, you cannot stand it. You want him to be as miserable as you are. Her words hung in the quiet office. She expected them to cut me deep. She expected me to revert to the insecure teenager who used to beg for her approval. But looking at her now, all I saw was a desperate woman trying to protect a son who brought absolutely nothing to the table. I am not jealous of Derek, I said softly but firmly. I feel sorry for him. He had to max out his credit cards just to fake a lifestyle he cannot afford. And I feel sorry for you, because you have spent your entire life enabling him. The trip is canceled. The money is gone. There is nothing left to discuss. You will rebook that trip today. Susan screamed, her composure shattering. You own this entire agency. You are going to put it on your corporate card and apologize to Jasmine for the distress you caused. I reached over to the communication console on my desk and pressed a single silver button. Yes, Miss Naomi, my security chief answered immediately through the crisp speaker. David, I need you in my office right now, please, I said clearly. We have a hostile visitor who needs a direct escort out of the building. My mother's jaw dropped in pure shock. You are calling security on your own. Mother, she gasped, stepping back from the desk. I am calling security on a trespasser who is disrupting my business, I corrected her, maintaining eye contact. You made it very clear on Friday night that I am just the sister. Well, today, I am just the CEO. The heavy office door opened, and David, a tall security professional, stepped inside. He looked at my mother and gestured politely toward the main exit. Mom, it is time to leave the premises, he said firmly. Susan grabbed her designer handbag, her hands shaking with absolute rage. You think you are so smart, Naomi, she spat, walking backward toward the door. You are going to regret this. I will make sure of it. You will pay for this immense disrespect today. David placed a firm but professional hand on her elbow, guiding her toward the glass exit. But my mother was not done. She planted her designer heels into the polished concrete floor, refusing to be quietly escorted away. She wanted an audience, and she was determined to make a spectacle of my supposed cruelty. My assistant and several junior planners peeked out from their cubicles, their eyes wide as they witnessed the matriarch of my family completely losing her composure. You think your money makes you untouchable, Naomi? She shouted, her voice cracking as she struggled against the security guard's gentle but unyielding grip. You think because you run this little agency you can dictate how this family operates. We raised you to be loyal. We sacrificed everything to give you a good life, and this is how you repay us. I remained seated behind my desk, watching her unravel. It was fascinating to see how quickly the mask of the elegant mother dissolved when she was denied access to my bank account. Now that the invisible chains of obligation were broken, her only remaining tactic was pure volume. "I am giving you one last chance to make this right," Susan sneered, leaning forward as David continued to inch her toward the main lobby. "Pick up the phone and put Derek back on that flight. If you refuse, I am stripping you of the only real family you have left." I crossed my arms and waited for the punchline. I knew she had one final card to play, the ultimate threat that she believed would instantly bring me to my knees. And there it was. "If you do not fix this right now, you are permanently banned from the family townhouse," she screamed, her face contorted with absolute malice. "Do you hear me, Naomi? Derek and Jasmine are moving into the Elm Street house this weekend as their wedding present. They are taking the master suite and starting their new life together. We are giving them the house so they can build a proper family. And you will never step foot on that property again. You are not welcome for Thanksgiving. You are not welcome for Christmas. You are dead to us." She breathed heavily, her chest heaving, having delivered what she thought was the fatal blow. She expected me to beg for forgiveness, terrified of losing my childhood home. I stood up slowly, buttoning the jacket of my charcoal suit. I walked around my mahogany desk and took a few measured steps toward her. The frantic energy she radiated was met by a wall of absolute silence from me. I stopped just a few feet away from her. David paused, allowing us this final interaction. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. "Are you sure it is your townhouse to give away, Mom?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet whisper. Susan froze. The furious redness in her cheeks suddenly drained away, leaving her pale. Her eyes darted back and forth, trying to process the words I had just spoken. "What are you talking about?" She stammered, her confidence briefly faltering before she tried to rebuild it. "Of course it is my house. Your father and I have lived there for 30 years. It is our property to give to Derek." I kept the cold smile on my face. "You might want to check the deed before giving out keys," I replied. "David, please ensure she makes it to the street." David nodded in agreement and forcefully maneuvered her out through the heavy glass doors of my corporate suite. My mother stumbled slightly as she was pushed out into the corridor. She turned back to look at me through the frosted glass, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound reaching me. Her face was a portrait of pure confusion mixed with creeping terror. She did not fully understand what I had just implied, but the seed of doubt was firmly planted. I turned around and walked back to my desk. The entire office was completely dead silent. I sat down in my chair and carefully opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a very thick manila folder labeled Apex Holdings, LLC. I ran my fingers over the paper inside. For 5 years, I had carried the secret of their financial ruin. They had just played their final hand, thinking they held all the power. They thought they were giving my brother $1 million asset. They had absolutely no idea they were simply giving him a direct one-way ticket to a brutal and devastating legal eviction process. I opened the thick manila folder labeled Apex Holdings, LLC, and spread the crisp legal documents across my mahogany desk. The top page was the original deed of trust for the Elm Street townhouse. Looking at the embossed seal of the state, my mind drifted back 5 years to the moment my parents' carefully constructed illusion of wealth almost completely shattered. 5 years ago, my father Richard made a series of disastrous financial decisions. He invested heavily in a failing tech startup, pouring every dime of his retirement savings and my mother's inheritance into a sinking ship. When the company inevitably went under, it took my parents' entire financial foundation with it. They were drowning in massive debt and facing imminent bankruptcy. I vividly remember the frantic phone calls and the humiliating cancellation of their expensive country club memberships. But the devastating blow came when the bank issued a formal notice of foreclosure on the Elm Street townhouse. The cherished family home was going to be auctioned off on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder. At the time, my corporate event planning agency was just beginning to generate massive profit margins. I knew that losing the house would completely break my parents. Despite years of their emotional coldness and blatant favoritism toward Derek, I still felt a twisted sense of obligation to save them from public ruin. But I also knew my father was a prideful man who would rather lose everything than accept a direct financial handout from the daughter he constantly belittled. So I orchestrated a completely anonymous rescue. I hired a sharp real estate attorney and formed Apex Holdings, LLC, a private holding company with my name buried deep in the confidential operating agreement. Through Apex Holdings, I swooped in and purchased the townhouse directly from the bank just 48 hours before the public foreclosure auction. I paid the bank in full, clearing all liens and outstanding mortgages. My attorney then approached my parents, posing as a representative of a faceless corporate investor who was willing to let them stay in the property as tenants. To ensure they could afford it without further borrowing, I set the monthly rent at a mere $500. It was a token amount that barely covered the annual property taxes and basic insurance premiums. For 5 years, my parents paid that $500 rent to a corporate lockbox, completely unaware that the money was simply sitting in a business account I controlled. I saved them from homelessness and preserved their fragile social standing in the upscale neighborhood. But instead of using that second chance to rebuild their finances and learn humility, they used the extra cash flow to double down on their fake high society lifestyle. They continued buying expensive clothes and leasing luxury cars, and worst of all, they lied to everyone about their living situation. They hid the truth from their friends, and they deliberately hid the truth from my brother. Derek was completely oblivious to the fact that his childhood home was legally owned by my corporate entity. My parents allowed him to believe that they owned the million-dollar property free and clear. When Derek started dating Jasmine, they amplified the lie to impress her wealthy family in Atlanta. They boasted about their real estate portfolio and heavily implied that Derek stood to inherit a massive physical asset. Jasmine fell for it hook, line, and sinker. She genuinely believed she was marrying into a family with deep pockets and substantial unencumbered assets. Now my mother had just promised them the very house she did not even own. She had authorized them to move into the master suite as a lavish wedding gift, treating my commercial property as her own personal bargaining chip. She thought she could punish me by banishing me from my childhood home, completely ignoring the legal realities of her situation. She was so blinded by her own arrogance and her desperate desire to elevate Derek that she had unwittingly orchestrated his absolute downfall. I picked up the original lease agreement signed by my father 5 years ago. The terms were incredibly clear. It was a standard month-to-month residential lease with 0 long-term protections. A specific clause clearly stated that any unauthorized subletting or transfer of occupancy would result in immediate termination of the agreement. By inviting Derek and Jasmine to permanently occupy the property, my parents had just handed me the legal leverage I needed to end this charade. I smiled, tapping my silver pen against the stark white paperwork. They wanted to play real estate moguls. It was time to introduce my brother and his new bride to their actual landlord. I carefully placed the lease agreement back into the manila folder and locked it securely in my bottom drawer. Just as I was pulling up the contact information for my real estate attorney, my office door flew open again. This time, it was not my mother. It was my executive assistant gripping her tablet with white knuckles. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with panic. She did not even apologize for interrupting me. She just walked straight to my desk and placed the tablet in front of me. "You need to see this right now," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is your sister-in-law. She is broadcasting live on Instagram and it is getting thousands of views every single minute." I looked down at the bright screen. Jasmine was sitting in what looked like the back of a luxury rideshare vehicle, probably on her way back from the airport. She was giving the performance of a lifetime. Her usually flawless makeup was strategically smudged under her eyes to give the illusion of relentless crying. She was sniffling into a tissue, holding the phone at a high angle to capture her calculated distress. I reached over and tapped the screen to unmute the volume. "I just cannot believe someone could be this evil," Jasmine sobbed into the camera, looking directly at her thousands of followers. "We were supposed to be boarding our flight to the Maldives right now. It was my dream honeymoon. But my husband's sister Naomi deliberately waited until we were standing at the check-in counter to completely cancel our reservations. She stole our trip right out from under us. She did it out of pure spite because she is a miserable, bitter single woman who cannot stand to see her brother happy. But it is deeper than that, you guys. It is so much deeper and more toxic." Jasmine paused for dramatic effect, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. She took a shaky breath, leaning closer to the camera. "She has always hated me," she continued, her voice dropping into a staged whisper. "From the moment Derek introduced us, she looked down on me. She could not stand that a successful white man was marrying a confident black woman. She is a bitter, racist sister-in-law who wanted to put me in my place. She literally banned me from the family and then financially abused us to ruin the most important week of my life. Please do not let her get away with this." I watched in absolute fascination as the viewer count on the top corner of the screen skyrocketed from 10,000 to 50,000 in a matter of minutes. The comment section was moving so fast, it was just a blur of angry text and red emojis. People were outraged. They were tagging prominent gossip blogs and social justice accounts demanding that my name be exposed. Jasmine had brilliantly weaponized the internet. She took a situation where she had been the aggressive, entitled bully and completely flipped the narrative to make herself the ultimate victim of racial and financial oppression. She knew exactly which buzzwords would trigger the algorithm and ignite the fury of the public. Within 20 minutes, the digital mob had successfully located my corporate event planning agency. My assistant refreshed the company page on the tablet, and I watched the collateral damage unfold in real time. We had maintained a flawless 5-star rating for 7 consecutive years. Now our page was being absolutely carpet-bombed with fake negative reviews. 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. The written complaints were vicious and entirely fabricated. People claiming I had ruined their weddings. People claiming my staff was discriminatory. People demanding that all corporate sponsors drop my agency immediately. The office phone lines began to light up like a Christmas tree as outraged internet strangers called just to scream profanities at my reception desk. My assistant looked at me terrified. "We need to issue a statement," she urged, pacing nervously in front of my desk. "We need to hire a crisis management PR firm right now, Naomi. Our major corporate clients are going to see this. If we do not defend ourselves, the algorithm will destroy our reputation by the end of the day." I picked up the tablet and completely closed the Instagram application. I handed the device back to her. "We are not issuing a statement," I said calmly. "We are not hiring a PR firm, and we are certainly not going to argue with a digital mob of teenagers who do not know the first thing about contract law or personal responsibility. Let her have her internet points. Let her bask in the viral sympathy." But the reviews, my assistant protested, pointing toward the ringing phones in the outer office. "Turn off the phones and route everything to the automated voicemail I instructed. Contact the review platforms and initiate the standard protocol for bot attacks. They will freeze the page and remove the fraudulent posts within 48 hours. I stood up and straightened my suit jacket. Jasmine thinks she can intimidate me with a smartphone and fake tears. She thinks a viral video is the ultimate weapon, but the internet is not a court of law, and she is about to find out that no amount of social media sympathy can stop a legal eviction notice. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct number to my real estate attorney. It was time to draft the paperwork. The line rang twice before my attorney picked up. "Hello, Naomi," he said, his voice sharp and professional. I assume you are calling about the Elm Street property. Word travels fast when your company is suddenly trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. Have you seen the video yet? I have seen enough of it, I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. I am not interested in fighting a public relations battle over a canceled vacation. I am calling because we have a much more pressing legal matter to handle. My parents have officially violated the terms of their lease agreement. They moved my brother Derek and his new wife Jasmine into the property this weekend and permanently gave them the master suite. I could hear the sound of a keyboard clacking on the other end of the line as Mr. Harrison pulled up my corporate files. Let me review the original paperwork for Apex Holdings, he murmured. Yes, here it is. Your father signed a standard month-to-month lease 5 years ago. Clause 7 clearly states that no subletting or long-term guests are permitted without the express written consent of the landlord. By allowing them to move in, your parents are in direct breach of the contract. Exactly, I said. And because Derek and Jasmine just moved their belongings into the house on Saturday, they have not established any legal residency or long-term tenant rights. They are legally classified as unauthorized occupants. I want them out, Mr. Harrison. I want all of them out. This is the perfect time to strike, he agreed, his tone shifting into full lawyer mode. If they had been living there for several months, we might have to deal with complex eviction proceedings and squatters' rights. But since they just arrived, they are completely vulnerable. We can issue a standard 30-day notice to vacate the premises. It is clean and legally bulletproof. Draft it immediately, I instructed. I want the notice to clearly state that the lease is being terminated due to unauthorized transfer of occupancy. And I want an addendum attached. If they do not vacate the property by the end of the 30 days, the token rent of $500 will be retroactively adjusted to the current market rate. I want no loopholes left open for them to exploit. Mr. Harrison let out a low whistle. The current market rate for a 4-bedroom townhouse in that specific neighborhood is easily $5,500 a month, he noted. That is going to be a massive financial shock for them. They will not be able to afford a prolonged legal battle if they are suddenly hit with those kinds of monthly fees. It will bankrupt them in a matter of weeks. They cannot afford the $500 without my charity, I corrected him quietly. My mother stood in my office today and threatened to ban me from that very house. She thought she held the ultimate power over my life. Jasmine thinks she holds the ultimate power by crying to her followers on the internet. It is time they both learn who actually holds the deed. I will have the documents drawn up within the hour, Mr. Harrison promised. I will hire a private process server to deliver the notice directly to the front door this afternoon. They have to physically hand the paperwork to an adult resident, so there will be no way for them to claim they never received the warning. Make sure the server goes directly to the townhouse, I said, checking my watch. Jasmine said she was on her way back from the airport. They will likely be home unpacking their luggage and trying to figure out how to survive the humiliation of their canceled honeymoon. It is the perfect time for a special legal delivery. I ended the call and set the phone down on my desk. I turned my chair around to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The city stretched out below me, a vast grid of concrete and glass. Somewhere out there, my brother and his wife were driving back to a house they believed was their royal palace. They thought they had won the war by turning the internet against me. But the internet does not pay property taxes. They had spent their entire adult lives treating me like an emotional punching bag and a financial safety net. Jasmine wanted to play the ultimate victim for an audience of strangers. But while she was busy managing her digital image, I was busy executing a legally binding eviction. The law only cares about whose name is printed on the deed. The real drama was just about to begin right now. Across town, the heavy oak front door of the Elm Street townhouse swung open. Derek and Jasmine dragged their expensive designer luggage over the threshold. The romantic entrance they had meticulously planned for their lavish wedding video was completely ruined by the bitter reality of their canceled flight. Jasmine threw her expensive travel bag onto the pristine hardwood floor of the foyer and immediately began pacing. She was still wearing the carefully coordinated airport outfit she had purchased specifically for the first-class lounge. Now it just felt like a ridiculous costume for a play that had been abruptly canceled. Derek tried his best to salvage the miserable afternoon. He walked into the expansive living room and gestured toward the towering stack of silver-wrapped wedding gifts sitting on the mahogany coffee table. Our parents had arranged them perfectly, anticipating the joyful arrival of the newlyweds. "Look at all this," Jasmine Derek said, forcing a strained, desperate smile. "We still have so much to celebrate today. We are standing inside a $1 million property. My parents gave us the master suite. We practically own this place. Naomi cannot take this away from us. We have a real foundation right here." Jasmine stopped pacing and looked around the luxurious space. The high vaulted ceilings and the elegant marble fireplace offered a small comfort to her deeply bruised ego. She crossed her arms and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Your sister is a complete vindictive sociopath," Jasmine muttered, shaking her head. "But you are right. We have this beautiful house. I can still create amazing home decor content for my brand. I will do a massive master bedroom makeover series. We will show everyone that we do not need her pathetic charity vacations when we live in a literal mansion together." Just as Jasmine reached for the first silver-wrapped box, a sharp, heavy knock echoed through the quiet foyer. Derek froze in his tracks. He looked back at the heavy oak door. "Who could that be?" he asked aloud. "My parents are at the country club trying to do damage control with your family. We are not expecting any deliveries today. Maybe it is someone dropping off another wedding gift," Jasmine suggested, her eyes lighting up slightly. "Or maybe it is a florist sending apologies from your terrible sister. Just go open it and see who is standing out there." Derek walked back to the foyer and pulled the heavy door open. Standing on the front porch was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a plain gray polo shirt and dark slacks. He held a thick, manila folder in his left hand. He did not look like a delivery driver or a florist. He had the rigid, no-nonsense posture of a man who delivered bad news for a living. "Are you Derek?" the man asked, his voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. "Yes, that is me," Derek replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Can I help you today? Are you looking for my father, Richard?" he added. "I am looking for all adult occupants currently residing at this exact address," the man stated firmly. "And are you Jasmine?" He looked past Derek, pointing at Jasmine, who had wandered into the hallway holding a crystal vase they had just unwrapped. "Yes, I am Jasmine," she answered, stepping forward with a highly curious expression. "Who are you exactly?" The man did not answer her question. Instead, he stepped forward and firmly pressed the thick manila envelope against Derek's chest, forcing him to instinctively grab it with both of his hands. "You have been legally served," he announced, stepping back quickly to ensure the transaction was complete. Derek stared down at the heavy envelope in his hands. "Served with what?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What is this all about?" "That is a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises," the process server recited, treating the interaction like a completely routine daily chore. "You are currently occupying this property in direct violation of the master lease agreement. By order of the property owner, you have 30 days to remove all personal belongings and vacate the property entirely right now." Derek scoffed, letting out a loud, nervous laugh. "You have the wrong house, buddy. My parents own this property. There is absolutely no lease. I suggest you read the documents, sir," the server said, walking away. Derek ripped open the envelope, pulling out the legal papers. The bold letters screamed, "Notice to vacate." His eyes locked onto the penalty clause. If the premises are not vacated, occupants will be responsible for a market rate rent of $5,500 per month. Derek's face lost all its color. The illusion of his $1 million inheritance shattered right there completely. Derek stared at the bold black letters on the legal document. For a brief second, genuine panic gripped his chest. But then the panic slowly morphed into loud, arrogant laughter. He tossed the thick stack of papers onto the mahogany coffee table right next to the silver-wrapped wedding gifts. Jasmine jumped slightly at the sudden noise, her eyes darting between her husband and the manila envelope. "What is so funny?" she demanded, her voice tight with lingering anxiety. "What did that man just hand you, Derek?" "It is just my sister throwing another one of her pathetic tantrums," Derek said, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye. "She actually hired some random guy off the street to play dress-up and hand-deliver a fake eviction notice. She is trying to scare us out of the house because she is furious that Mom and Dad gave the master suite to us instead of her." Jasmine walked over to the coffee table and gingerly picked up the notice to vacate. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon. "Are you absolutely sure this is fake, Derek?" she asked, tracing the embossed seal with her manicured fingernail. "It looks incredibly authentic. It says the property is owned by a company called Apex Holdings, LLC. I thought your parents owned this house outright." "They do own it," Derek scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Think about it, Jasmine. Naomi runs a corporate event planning agency. She deals with fake props and staging all day long. Printing a bogus legal document on fancy paper is literally her job. She probably just Googled a random LLC name to make it look intimidating. There is no way my parents would be secretly renting their own house. They have lived here for 30 years. They are wealthy, established members of this community. Naomi is just having a total psychological breakdown because she realized she has zero power over our family anymore." Jasmine slowly nodded, wanting desperately to believe him. The alternative was simply too terrifying to consider. She carefully placed the papers back onto the table. "So what do we do now?" she asked, crossing her arms. "We cannot just let her harass us like this. First, she ruins my honeymoon content, and now she is sending fake legal threats to our front door." "I am going to put an end to this right now," Derek declared, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "I am calling my dad. He is at the country club right now. Once I tell him what Naomi just did, he is going to completely cut her off. She will be lucky if he even lets her keep her last name after this stunt." Derek dialed his father's number and put the phone on speaker so Jasmine could hear the satisfying reprimand. The phone rang 3 times before Richard answered. The background noise of the country club dining room was loud with clinking glasses and wealthy patrons laughing. "Hello, Derek," his father answered, his tone attempting to sound cheerful despite the disastrous weekend. "Please tell me you and Jasmine are settling into the house okay." "Dad, you are not going to believe what Naomi just did," Derek announced, his voice brimming with arrogant confidence. "She actually hired an actor to come to the front door and hand me a fake eviction notice. She printed out all these bogus legal documents claiming the house is owned by some fake company called Apex Holdings. She is trying to demand $5,500 a month in rent. You need to call her right now and tell her to back off." Derek waited for the familiar sound of his father's booming laughter. He waited for Richard to express outrage and immediately take his side, just like he had done for the past 30 years. He expected his dad to launch into a tirade about Naomi's jealousy and promise to punish her for daring to threaten the golden child. But the laughter never came. Instead, the line went completely dead silent. The background noise of the country club seemed to vanish. The only sound was the faint static of the cellular connection. "Dad," Derek said, leaning closer to the phone. "Did you hear me? I said Naomi sent a fake eviction notice." The silence stretched on for another agonizing 10 seconds. Jasmine looked down at the speakerphone, her expression slowly shifting from annoyance to genuine dread. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was completely unrecognizable. It was not the strong, confident boom of a wealthy patriarch. It was the weak, trembling whisper of a broken man. Richard choked out, his breathing shallow and erratic. "Oh God, Derek, what did you just say?" "Apex Holdings. Did the paper say Apex Holdings?" Derek felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his neck. "Yeah, Dad," he replied, his arrogant smile finally collapsing. "It says Apex Holdings." "Why? What does that mean?" Richard let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. It is not fake, Derek, he whispered. The notice is real. Derek stood frozen with the phone pressed to his ear. The line went dead. He slowly lowered the device, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Jasmine was staring at him, her eyes wide with mounting panic. What did he mean it is real? She demanded, her voice rising an octave. Derek, if your parents own this house, why is your father crying on the phone? Derek could not form a coherent sentence. He just stared blankly at the stack of wedding gifts on the coffee table. 20 minutes later, the heavy front door flew open. Richard and Susan burst into the foyer. They had practically sprinted from their car. The polished country club facade they usually wore was completely shattered. Susan had tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. Richard looked like he had aged 10 years during the short drive over. He was breathing heavily, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. Jasmine immediately stepped forward, crossing her arms defensively. Someone needs to tell me exactly what is going on right now, she demanded, her voice sharp and uncompromising. I was promised $1 million home. I was told I was marrying into a family with a massive real estate portfolio. Why did a process server just hand my husband an eviction notice? Richard walked slowly into the living room and collapsed onto the velvet sofa. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, jagged sigh. Susan stood behind him, gripping the back of the sofa, as if it was the only thing keeping her standing. Derek walked over and threw the legal document onto the coffee table right in front of his father. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke, Dad? Derek pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell me Naomi just hacked into a legal database and printed this to scare us. Richard looked up, his eyes red and swollen. 5 years ago, I made some terrible investments. He began, his voice barely more than a raspy whisper. I put everything we had into a startup that went completely bankrupt. We lost all our savings. We lost your mother's inheritance. We maxed out every line of credit we had just to keep up appearances. Derek stumbled backward, as if he had been physically struck. What are you talking about? He stammered. We go to the country club every weekend. You drive a luxury car. We have always had money. It was all a carefully maintained illusion. Susan sobbed, burying her face in her hands. We were drowning in debt, Derek. The bank issued a formal notice of foreclosure on this house. We were 48 hours away from being thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing. Jasmine felt the room spinning. She grabbed the edge of the fireplace mantel to steady herself. So, who owns the house? She asked, her tone turning completely lethal. If the bank foreclosed, who bought it? Richard pointed a trembling finger at the eviction notice on the coffee table. A private holding company called Apex Holdings bought it directly from the bank, he explained. They paid off all our liens and allowed us to stay here as tenants. We signed a standard month-to-month lease. We only pay $500 a month in rent. That is the only reason we could afford to keep living here and pretend everything was normal. Derek's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. But the eviction notice says Apex Holdings is demanding we leave, and the process server said Naomi sent him. How does Naomi know the company that owns the house? Because Naomi is the company, Richard confessed, his voice breaking completely. Your sister is the sole owner of Apex Holdings LLC. She is the one who bought the house out of foreclosure. She is the one who has been secretly subsidizing our entire lifestyle for the last 5 years. We are her tenants, Derek. She is our landlord. And because your mother told her we were giving the house to you, Naomi just terminated our lease. The silence in the living room was absolute and suffocating. The grand illusion of the wealthy family was completely obliterated. Derek looked around the luxurious space, suddenly realizing that he owned absolutely nothing. The walls, the floors, the roof over his head, all belonged to the sister he had just banished from his wedding to protect an aesthetic. Jasmine let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She looked at Derek, her eyes filled with absolute disgust. You are completely broke, she whispered venomously. You and your entire family are nothing but frauds living on your sister's charity. Derek opened his mouth to defend himself. But before he could speak, Jasmine noticed a thick envelope sticking out of his bag. She angrily yanked it out. Jasmine stepped back, holding the thick white envelope she had just pulled from Derek's leather duffel bag. The return address caught her eye immediately. It was from a major national bank known for issuing premium credit cards. Derek lunged forward, his face suddenly drained of color. "Give that back to me, Jasmine!" he shouted frantically, swiping at the air as she easily sidestepped him. "That is my private mail. You have absolutely no right to look at that." His sudden panic only fueled her suspicion. "If you have nothing to hide, then why are you shaking?" she demanded, her voice sharp and unrelenting. She tore the top of the envelope open with her manicured fingers, completely ignoring his desperate pleas. She pulled out a thick stack of papers stapled at the top corner. The words, "Final Collection Notice," were printed in bold red ink across the top of the first page. Jasmine began to read the document, her eyes scanning the itemized list of charges and the aggressively highlighted overdue balances. The room was dead silent, except for her jagged breathing. Richard and Susan sat frozen on the velvet sofa, watching their son's final remaining secret unravel right in front of them. The sophisticated facade they had all worked so hard to maintain was burning to the ground. $70,000, Jasmine whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and absolute rage. She looked up from the papers, staring at Derek as if he were a complete stranger. "You have $70,000 in credit card debt." Derek swallowed hard, taking a step backward. "I can explain that," he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "It is just a temporary cash flow issue. I am consolidating it next month." Jasmine did not let him finish. She started reading the line items out loud, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the living room they were about to be evicted from. $15,000 for the custom floral arrangements, she read, her tone dripping with venom. $10,000 for the premium open bar. $8,000 for your designer tuxedo. $12,000 for the reception venue deposit. She dropped the papers onto the hardwood floor, watching them scatter. "You paid for your entire half of the wedding on high-interest credit cards," she screamed, completely losing her carefully maintained composure. "You told me you had a massive investment portfolio. You told me you were liquidating assets to cover these expenses. You lied to me, Derek. You maxed out credit cards to throw a party you could not remotely afford. I did it for you." Derek yelled back, his own frustration finally boiling over. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You were the one demanding the high society aesthetic, Jasmine. You were the one who invited 500 people because you needed to impress your followers on the internet. You refused to compromise on a single detail. I wanted to give you the perfect day. I wanted you to be happy. You wanted to look rich," she shot back, stepping right up to his face. "You wanted my family to think you were a wealthy, sophisticated man, but you are nothing. You do not own a house, you do not have investments, you do not even have enough money to pay for the rehearsal dinner, which is exactly why you tried to force your sister to foot the bill on Friday night." The reality of the situation crashed down on Jasmine with suffocating weight. Her entire influencer brand was built on the image of a successful luxury lifestyle. She had spent the last year bragging to her followers about marrying into an affluent family. But the truth was far worse than just social embarrassment. They were now legally married. Legally, depending on the state laws, she might now be legally tied to his financial disaster. She was permanently bound to a man, completely drowning in unsecured consumer debt and facing an imminent legal eviction from a house owned by his estranged sister. "This is all Naomi's fault," Derek pleaded, turning to his parents for support. "If she had just acted like a normal sister and helped pay for the wedding like we expected, none of this would be happening. She is a multi-millionaire, Jasmine. She could wipe out this debt with a single check. She is just punishing us." Jasmine let out a very hollow and extremely bitter laugh. She looked at her new husband and saw exactly what Naomi had seen all along: a weak, entitled man who blamed everyone else for his own catastrophic failures. "Naomi is not punishing us," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "Naomi simply stopped paying for your pathetic, endless delusions. And you dragged me right down into the mud with you. Naomi simply stopped paying for your pathetic, endless delusions. And you drag me right down into the mud with you. Jasmine turned her back on Derek, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. She refused to look at him anymore. Her mind was already racing through the legal implications of an annulment. She had spent the last 2 years carefully curating her online image as a wealthy, sophisticated woman. Now she was standing in a living room that belonged to the sister she had just publicly humiliated, legally, bound to a man who was $70,000 in debt. The sheer weight of the panic settling over the room was suffocating. Derek stood frozen, staring at the scattered credit card statements on the hardwood floor. He looked at his mother Susan, who was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. He looked at his father Richard, whose face was pale and drawn. For the first time in his life, Derek realized there was no safety net waiting to catch him. There was no secret fund. There was no inheritance. The only reason he had never experienced the consequences of his reckless behavior was because I had always quietly absorbed the impact, and he had just banned me from his wedding and tried to force me to pay for the rehearsal dinner. "We cannot afford the new rent," Derek whispered, breaking the heavy silence. "If we do not leave in 30 days, the notice says we owe $5,500 a month, plus the credit card minimum payments. We are going to be completely bankrupt by the end of the year." "We are already bankrupt," Richard said, his voice hollow and defeated. "We have been bankrupt for 5 years, Derek. Your sister was the only thing keeping us off the street. And because of your arrogance and your mother's endless need to show off, we have pushed her too far. We are completely at her mercy now. We can fight this in court." Susan interjected, her voice shrill with desperation. "We can hire a lawyer. We have lived here for decades. She cannot just throw us out like garbage." "With what money?" Susan, Richard snapped, turning on his wife with sudden ferocity. "With what money are we going to hire a real estate attorney to fight a corporate holding company? Naomi holds the deed. Naomi holds the original lease that I signed with my own hand. She has every legal right to evict us because we violated the terms of the agreement. We have absolutely nothing to fight her with." Richard slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly, he almost dropped the device. He stared at the screen for a long moment. 30 years of pride were crumbling to dust in his hands. He took a deep breath and pressed the call button. Across the city, I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a catering contract for an upcoming corporate gala. When my private line rang, I glanced at the caller ID. I saw my father's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. "Hello, Richard," I said, keeping my voice perfectly professional and detached. "Naomi?" He began, his voice cracking instantly. "Please do not hang up the phone. I am begging you to just listen to me for 1 minute." It was jarring to hear the absolute defeat in his voice. This was a man who had spent my entire life speaking to me with condescension and cold authority. Now he sounded like a frightened child. "I am listening," I replied, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. "We got the legal notice," he stammered. "Derek and Jasmine got the notice." "Naomi, you cannot do this. We have absolutely nowhere to go. Derek is drowning in debt from the wedding. If you kick us out, we will be ruined, all of us. We will be homeless. Please, Naomi. I know we have made terrible mistakes. I know we have treated you poorly. But you are still my daughter. Please let us sit down and sort this out like a family." I listened to his desperate pleas. He was finally dropping his pride, but he was still trying to use the concept of family as a weapon to manipulate my emotions. He thought if he just apologized enough, I would tear up the eviction notice. "I want to hold an emergency family meeting." Richard continued, his breathing ragged. "Just come over to the townhouse tonight. We will sit down in the living room and figure this out. Whatever you want, we will do it. Just please come over." I looked at the thick manila folder sitting on my mahogany desk. Going to the townhouse one last time would give me the perfect opportunity to deliver the final absolute blow in person. All right, I said, my voice ice cold. I will meet you at the townhouse at 7 o'clock tonight. Make sure everyone is in the living room when I arrive. Thank you, Naomi. Richard gasped, sounding incredibly relieved. Thank you so much. We will see you at 7. I ended the call and placed the phone back on its cradle. They actually thought they could negotiate their way out of this. They had no idea what was coming. At exactly 7 o'clock, I pulled my sleek black sedan into the driveway of the Elm Street townhouse. The evening air was cool and crisp. I sat in the car for a moment looking at the imposing brick facade of the property I had secretly owned for 5 years. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I was a child, but my perspective had completely shifted. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking approval from parents who only valued my brother. I stepped out of the car wearing a perfectly tailored emerald green suit that commanded absolute authority. I walked up the stone pathway, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I did not bother knocking. I pulled my master key from my designer bag, unlocked the heavy oak front door, and stepped inside. The atmosphere in the living room was suffocatingly tense. It felt like walking into a funeral parlor. Richard was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair, looking completely hollowed out. His usual commanding presence was completely gone. Susan sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Derek stood near the fireplace, nervously picking at his cuticles. But Jasmine was a completely different story. She was sitting in the center of the sofa with her legs crossed and her arms folded tightly across her chest. Despite discovering her new husband's massive financial debt just hours earlier, she was still wearing her carefully crafted mask of arrogance. She had apparently decided that the best defense was to go on the offensive. I walked into the center of the room and remained standing. I did not take off my coat, and I did not accept Richard's weak gesture toward an empty chair. I simply looked at the four of them, waiting for someone to speak. Naomi, thank you for coming. Richard started, his voice wavering slightly. We really need to talk about this notice you sent. But before Richard could finish his thought, Jasmine forcefully interrupted him. She leaned forward, uncrossing her arms and pointing a manicured finger directly at me. We certainly do need to talk, Naomi, she snapped, her voice dripping with misplaced authority. Because what you did today was completely unacceptable. You maliciously canceled our luxury honeymoon and humiliated me in front of my entire online community. You caused me severe emotional distress on what was supposed to be the happiest weekend of my life. I raised an eyebrow, looking at her with genuine amusement. I caused you emotional distress, I repeated flatly. Yes, you did. Jasmine shot back, her eyes flashing with anger. You sabotaged my brand. You ruined my wedding content. And then you had the absolute audacity to send a man to this house to threaten my husband with an eviction document. I know Derek is in debt, Naomi. I know your parents have been renting this house from your holding company. They confessed everything. But that does not give you the right to treat us like peasants. You owe us a massive apology. I stood there in complete silence, letting her ridiculous words echo off the vaulted ceilings. She had just acknowledged that her husband was broke and her in-laws were completely bankrupt, yet she was still demanding an apology from the only person in the room who actually owned anything. And that is not all, Jasmine continued, emboldened by my silence. Derek and I have discussed how to fix this situation. We are willing to forgive your petty behavior regarding the honeymoon, but there has to be a real consequence for the emotional damage you caused today. To make things right, we expect you to formally transfer the deed of this townhouse into Derek's name by the end of the week, free and clear. I stared at her, making sure I had heard her correctly. You want me to give you my $1 million commercial property as an apology for canceling a vacation you banned me from attending? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Susan suddenly sat up straighter on the sofa, nodding her head in vigorous agreement. Jasmine is absolutely right, Naomi. My mother chimed in, completely ignoring the devastating reality of their financial ruin. You have dragged this family through the mud today. You have embarrassed us in front of Jasmine's parents. The only way to fix this disaster and keep the family together is to sign the house over to your brother. It is the honorable thing to do. You have plenty of money from your little event agency. Derek needs this house to build his future and recover from the debt he took on for the wedding. I looked at my mother and then at Jasmine. Their entitlement was a bottomless pit. They were standing in a burning building completely surrounded by the ashes of their own lies, and they were demanding that I hand them the deed to the ashes. They truly believed that if they just acted angry enough and demanded enough, I would eventually fold and give them exactly what they wanted, just like I had always done. I did not laugh. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out the thick manila folder I had brought from my office. I walked over to the mahogany coffee table right past Jasmine and dropped the heavy stack of legal documents right next to the scattered pile of Derek's final credit card collection notices. The sound of the thick paper slapping against the polished wood echoed sharply in the quiet room. I spread the documents out, making sure the official state seals and the bold printed headings were perfectly visible to everyone sitting on the sofa. "There is no apology happening tonight," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch that commanded absolute silence, "and there will certainly be no transfer of any property deeds to anyone in this room." Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand and pointed directly at the documents on the table. "Before you say another word, Jasmine, I highly suggest you read the papers in front of you, because you have spent the last 2 years operating under a massive delusion. You thought you were marrying into a wealthy family. You thought my brother was a successful man with a massive real estate portfolio and deep pockets. You thought my parents were high society aristocrats who casually gifted million-dollar townhouses as wedding presents. Let me introduce you to the actual reality of the family you just legally bound yourself to." I picked up the top document and held it up. "This is the original notice of public auction and foreclosure issued by the bank 5 years ago. My parents did not give you this house because they do not own this house. 5 years ago, they completely bankrupted themselves. They lost every single penny they had in terrible investments. They maxed out their credit. They lost their savings. They were 48 hours away from having their belongings thrown onto the curb by the county sheriff. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the tailored suits, it is all a complete mirage. They have been living in absolute financial ruin for half a decade." Jasmine stared at the foreclosure notice, her mouth slightly open. I placed it down and picked up the next document. "And this is the deed of trust." I continued tapping the heavy paper, showing that Apex Holdings, LLC, purchased this property directly from the bank for cash. I am the sole proprietor of Apex Holdings. I bought this house out of pure pity. I allowed them to stay here for a token rent of $500 a month because I did not want to see my own parents homeless. Every single luxury they flaunted in front of you and your family was funded by my charity. Every time Derek took you to an expensive dinner or bought you a designer gift, he was spending money that he only had because I was secretly subsidizing his living expenses. I turned my gaze to Derek, who was staring at the floor, unable to look his new wife in the eye. "My brother is a 30-year-old man who still relies on his sister to keep a roof over his head," I stated brutally. "He has no assets. He has no trust fund. He has $70,000 in high-interest credit card debt because he wanted to play pretend for your Instagram followers. He is a financial parasite who thought he could bite the hand that feeds him and still get his allowance." I looked back at Jasmine, whose arrogant mask had completely dissolved into a portrait of absolute horror. "You banned me from your wedding because you said I did not fit your high society aesthetic." I reminded her, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "You said I was pathetic. You said I was just a bitter single woman. But the truth is, I am the only person in this entire room with a positive net worth. You did not marry a wealthy heir, Jasmine. You married a man buried in debt who lives in a house owned by the sister he continually despises." Susan let out a loud sob, burying her face in her hands again. Richard looked like he was about to physically collapse into his leather armchair. They knew I was verbally dismantling the last remaining shreds of their dignity, but they could not say a single word to stop me. Every word I spoke was the absolute truth. The house of cards they had built was finally and permanently destroyed. They were completely exposed. They had absolutely nothing left to hide behind anymore. Jasmine stood up slowly, trembling with rage. She looked at Derek. She looked at my parents. She looked around the room as if the walls were suddenly closing in on her. The wealthy lifestyle she had desperately chased and ruthlessly defended had evaporated into thin air, leaving her stranded in a living room filled with liars. She grabbed her purse and marched to the front door without speaking to her husband. Derek lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Jasmine, please wait," he begged, his voice cracking with panic. "We can fix this. I promise you we will figure this out together. Just give me a chance to talk to my sister." Jasmine snatched her arm away as if he had burned her. "Do not touch me," she hissed with contempt. "You are a fraud, Derek. Your entire family is a massive fraud. I need to get out of this house before I suffocate." The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind her, shaking the framed family portraits on the wall. The sound of her car tires squealing out of the driveway echoed through the quiet suburban street. Derek stared at the closed door for a moment, before slowly turning back to face me. The arrogant smirk he had worn at the rehearsal dinner was completely gone, replaced by the frantic expression of a cornered animal. He took a hesitant step toward me, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. "Naomi, please," he started, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You have made your point. You exposed us. You humiliated me in front of my wife. Is that not enough revenge for one weekend? You cannot actually go through with this eviction. I am your brother. We grew up together. We share the same blood. You cannot just throw your own flesh and blood out onto the street. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The emotional manipulation that used to completely paralyze me when we were younger now felt incredibly hollow and pathetic. "You did not seem to care about sharing the same blood on Friday night, Derek," I reminded him, my voice sharp and unwavering. "When Jasmine slid that $6,000 bill across the table and told me I was banned from your wedding, you did not stand up and say I was your sister. You did not defend my place in this family. You just sat there adjusting the $8,000 watch I bought you and told me to accept my banishment quietly." I was just trying to keep the peace, he pleaded, taking another step forward. Jasmine was stressed about the aesthetic. "You know how weddings are. People get emotional and make rash decisions." "It was not a rash decision," I corrected him, stepping forward to meet his gaze. "It was a calculated insult. You uninvited me because I was not good enough to be seen with your high society guests. You agreed with Jasmine when she said I was pathetic and single. So tell me, Derek, why are you begging for the house of someone so pathetic? Why are you demanding charity from the sister who ruins your aesthetic?" He swallowed hard, darting his eyes toward the documents on the table. He knew he had absolutely no defense for his behavior, so he shifted his strategy to sheer financial desperation. "We cannot afford the $5,500 penalty rent," he confessed, his voice trembling. "You know I am completely buried in credit card debt. Even with both of our incomes, Jasmine and I could never make those monthly payments, and Mom and Dad have nothing left. If you do not let us stay here for the original $500, we will have to declare bankruptcy by the end of the month." "That sounds like a very difficult financial puzzle for you to solve," I replied, crossing my arms. "But it is no longer my responsibility to solve it for you. The $500 rent was a massive gift. It was a lifeline I extended to this family to keep you off the street. And instead of using that lifeline to rebuild your lives, you used it to fund a fake luxury lifestyle and treat me like garbage." My mother let out another loud sob from the sofa. "Naomi, please," she wailed, her face buried in her hands. "You are destroying this family." "I did not destroy anything, Susan. I said, looking directly at her. I simply stopped paying the maintenance fee for the illusion. The reality of the real estate market is brutal. $5,500 is the exact market rate for a 4-bedroom townhouse in this exclusive neighborhood. You wanted to live like wealthy aristocrats. Now you have to pay the actual price of admission. Derek fell to his knees right in front of the coffee table. Derek fell to his knees right in front of the coffee table. He grabbed the edge of the polished mahogany, staring at the scattered documents as if they were written in a foreign language. The physical collapse of the golden child was a pathetic sight to behold. For 30 years, he had floated on a cloud of unearned privilege and endless bailouts. Now gravity had finally caught up with him. He let out a choked sob, burying his face against his arms. Seeing her precious son completely broken, my mother could no longer maintain her seat on the velvet sofa. Susan slid down onto the hardwood floor, crawling over to wrap her arms around Derek's shaking shoulders. It was a perfect tableau of the toxic dynamic that had defined my entire life. They were clinging to each other in the ruins of their own making, still completely ignoring the daughter who had kept the roof over their heads. "Naomi, please, I am begging you," Susan cried, her voice completely stripped of its usual haughty arrogance. She looked up at me, her makeup heavily smeared across her cheeks. "We will pay the normal rent. We will find a way to pay the $5,500 every single month. I will sell my jewelry. Richard can come out of retirement and find a consulting job. Derek can get a second job to pay off his credit cards. We will do whatever it takes to make the payments. Just please let us keep the house." She reached out with a trembling hand, trying to grasp the hem of my tailored suit pants. I took a deliberate step backward, ensuring she could not touch me. "You are going to sell your cubic zirconia jewelry to afford a premium mortgage payment?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "We both know you pawned your real diamonds 3 years ago, Susan, and Richard has not worked a single day since his startup collapsed. You are making empty promises because you are terrified of the consequences. But even if you miraculously found a way to generate that kind of income, it would not matter." Susan stopped crying and stared at me, her brow furrowed in desperate confusion. "What do you mean it would not matter?" she whispered. "You just said the market rate is $5,500. If we agree to pay your price, why would you still kick us out? This is our home, Naomi. This is where you grew up. You cannot just erase our family history because you are angry about a rehearsal dinner." I reached into my designer tote bag one final time. There was one last document I had intentionally withheld from the stack on the coffee table. It was printed on heavy watermarked legal paper and bore the official stamp of a highly aggressive commercial real estate firm. I did not drop this one onto the table. I held it out, holding it perfectly still so my mother could read the bold black text printed across the top margin. "I am not kicking you out to punish you for the rehearsal dinner," I explained, my voice dropping to a perfectly calm and chilling register. "And I am not offering you a new lease at market rate." The notice to vacate was not a negotiation tactic, it was a strict legal formality. "I cannot rent this house to you, Susan. I cannot rent it to anyone." Richard finally lifted his head from his hands, his bloodshot eyes locking onto the document in my hand. "Why not?" He rasped, his voice sounding like dry sandpaper. "Because I do not own it anymore," I replied, delivering the final lethal blow. "I sold it yesterday morning." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Derek stopped crying completely, his mouth hanging open in silent disbelief. Susan let go of Derek's shoulders, her hands falling limply to her sides. "You sold it," Richard echoed the concept, failing to compute in his mind. "I sold it to Vanguard Commercial Development," I clarified, handing the purchase agreement directly to my father. "They specialize in aggressive urban rezoning. They paid me a massive premium in cash because they have been trying to acquire this specific block for 3 years. They are not interested in preserving our beautiful family history, Susan. They are zoning this entire acre for a commercial strip mall." Susan let out a horrific wailing sound, clutching her chest, as if she had just been shot. "No," she screamed, thrashing against the hardwood floor. "You did not. You could not do that to us. The ink is already dry, I said, stepping away from the devastating scene. The $5,500 penalty on the eviction notice was just a legal placeholder to prevent you from dragging out the process in court. The commercial developers have already filed the demolition permits with the city. You do not have 30 days to figure out a payment plan. You have exactly 28 days to pack up your entire fake life and get out of this house before the bulldozers arrive and crush it to the ground. The silence that followed my announcement was heavier than concrete. Then the front door violently burst open. Jasmine stormed back into the foyer. She had not made it out of the driveway. She realized her designer luggage was still sitting on the living room floor. She marched back in just in time to hear the words, demolition permits and bulldozers. Bulldozers! Jasmine shrieked, dropping her purse onto the hardwood floor and lunging toward Derek with her manicured hands curled into fists. You brought me to a house scheduled for demolition. You married me under the pretense of a millionaire lifestyle, but you are homeless. You trapped me in a fraudulent marriage. Derek backed away, holding his hands up to shield himself from his furious bride. Jasmine, please, I did not know. I swear I did not know she sold it. You do not know anything. Jasmine screamed, her face inches from his. You are 30 years old, and you have absolutely nothing. No house, no money, just $70,000 in debt, and a family of complete liars. I am filing for an annulment when the courthouse opens tomorrow. You are a complete fraud, and I am not letting your pathetic financial ruin destroy my brand or my life. Susan scrambled to her feet. The shock of losing her home had rapidly mutated into pure venomous rage, and she desperately needed a target. Since she could no longer control me, she turned her sights on the woman who insulted her golden child. Do not speak to my son that way, Susan snarled, stepping aggressively between Jasmine and Derek. You are the one who caused this entire disaster. If you had not been so obsessed with your internet brand, none of this would be happening. Jasmine whipped her head around to glare at my mother. Excuse me. I caused this. You lied to me about owning a $1 million townhouse. You started this at the restaurant, Susan yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Jasmine's face. You just had to have the perfect, exclusive aesthetic. You are the one who told Naomi she was banned from the wedding. You slid that massive rehearsal dinner bill across the table and demanded she pay it. If you acted grateful, Naomi would have never canceled the honeymoon or sold this house. You completely ruined my son's life with your greed. Your son ruined his own life. Jasmine fired back, her voice completely raw with fury. And you helped him do it. You are a broke, pathetic woman pretending to be a country club socialite while your estranged daughter pays your rent. Do not even dare try to blame me for the fact that you raised a completely useless man who has to put his own wedding tuxedo on a credit card. Get out of my house, Susan screamed, completely forgetting that the house no longer belonged to her or to anyone in the family for that matter. Gladly, Jasmine yelled right back. Grab my bags, Derek. Carry my luggage to my car right now. It is the absolute least you can do before I legally erase you from my existence. Derek looked frantically between his mother and his wife, completely paralyzed. Richard remained frozen in his leather armchair, staring blankly at the wall, as his entire legacy disintegrated into a vicious screaming match on the living room rug. I stood near the coffee table, watching the absolute chaos unfold. The three of them were trapped in a toxic triangle of their own making. They were viciously tearing into each other, hurling insults and shifting blame, completely incapable of taking personal responsibility for their actions. They were vipers trapped in a burning cage, biting each other as the flames closed in around them. I realized I had absolutely nothing left to say. The legal documents on the table spoke for themselves. The reality of the market and the consequences of their cruelty had finally arrived. I slowly reached down and picked up my designer leather tote bag. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald suit. Nobody in the room even noticed me moving. Susan was currently screaming about Jasmine's social media followers, and Jasmine was threatening to expose the family bankruptcy to every gossip blog on the internet. Derek was begging them both to stop fighting. I turned my back on the screaming match and walked toward the foyer. The sound of their fighting echoed through the grand hallways, a fitting soundtrack for the end of an era. I stepped over Jasmine's abandoned purse, opened the heavy oak front door, and walked out into the cool evening air. I firmly pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me, leaving them completely alone with their crushing debt, their endless lies, and exactly 28 days to pack. 3 days after I walked out of the townhouse, Derek decided he was not going to give up without a fight. His entire life had been defined by finding loopholes and relying on others to clean up his messes. Since Jasmine had officially filed for an annulment and moved back to Atlanta, Derek was left completely alone with my parents. The reality of the impending demolition was setting in, but Derek's arrogance still blinded him. He genuinely believed the law could protect him from his financial incompetence. On Tuesday morning, Derek walked into the downtown office of a highly aggressive real estate attorney named Mr. Mitchell. Derek had maxed out his final credit card just to afford the consultation fee. He sat in the leather chair across from the mahogany desk, clutching the eviction notice and the property deed. He was determined to twist the narrative and portray himself as the ultimate victim of a greedy corporate landlord. Derek confidently explained his situation. He spun a ridiculous story about how he had lived in the Elm Street townhouse his entire life and therefore had an undeniable legal claim to the property. He threw around legal buzzwords he had quickly searched on the internet. "I want to claim squatters' rights," Derek demanded, leaning forward in his chair. "I have established a long-term residency in that house. My sister cannot just sell the property out from under me and force me onto the street in less than a month. I want you to file an injunction. I know my rights." Mr. Mitchell listened silently. He was an experienced attorney who dealt with desperate tenants every single day. He reached across the desk and picked up the documents Derek had brought. He adjusted his glasses and spent several minutes carefully reading through the Apex Holdings LLC paperwork, the original foreclosure buyout agreement, and the 30-day notice to vacate. The confidence that Derek had carried into the office slowly began to evaporate in the cold silence of the room. Mr. Mitchell finally put the papers down and let out a dry, humorless laugh. He took off his glasses and looked at Derek as if he were a completely delusional child. "You do not have any squatters' rights," Derek, the attorney, stated bluntly. "Squatters' rights, or adverse possession, only apply to individuals who occupy an abandoned property continuously without the owner's permission or knowledge. You are not a squatter. You are a tenant. And you are a tenant with an incredibly weak legal standing." Derek frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair. "What do you mean I am a tenant?" he argued. "I never signed a lease with my sister. My dad signed the lease 5 years ago. I did not even know she owned the holding company until last week. That means I am an unauthorized occupant, right? So I should have squatters' rights." Mr. Mitchell tapped his finger against a specific page in the documents. He pulled out the original master lease agreement my father had signed. "Actually, Derek, you did sign a lease," the attorney corrected him. "When your father signed this month-to-month agreement 5 years ago, there was a mandatory addendum requiring all adult occupants to be legally registered and sign as secondary tenants. You were 25 years old at the time. Your signature is right here on page 4, explicitly agreeing to the terms of the month-to-month tenancy under Apex Holdings, LLC." Derek stared at the paper. He vaguely remembered his father shoving a stack of documents in his face 5 years ago, telling him it was just standard insurance paperwork for the house. He had signed it without reading a single word, completely trusting the illusion his parents had built. "Your sister has an ironclad corporate structure." Mr. Mitchell continued, his tone completely devoid of sympathy. "She owns the LLC. The LLC owns the house. You signed a month-to-month lease that requires only a standard 30-day notice for termination. Furthermore, the property has already been legally sold to a commercial developer who has secured valid demolition permits. There is absolutely no judge in this state who would grant you an injunction. If you try to fight this in court, you will lose immediately. You will also be forced to pay your sister's legal fees and the commercial developer's financial damages for delaying their project. You are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties. Derek was completely paralyzed. His last desperate scheme had just been effortlessly dismantled. "My professional advice is to pack your boxes," Mr. Mitchell said, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "You have exactly 25 days left. I strongly suggest you start looking for a very cheap studio apartment right now." Derek walked out of the downtown law office in a complete daze. The heavy doors shut behind him, severing his final hope. He stood on the sidewalk watching city traffic rush by, paralyzed by his situation. He had exactly 25 days to pack 30 years of his life and find a place to live with zero money in his account. But the legal nightmare was only just beginning. When he dragged himself back to the Elm Street townhouse that afternoon, he found another legal document taped to the heavy front door. This time it was not an eviction notice from my holding company. It was a formal petition for annulment filed by Jasmine's attorneys. She was officially seeking to dissolve the marriage on the grounds of severe financial fraud and deliberate misrepresentation of assets. She was claiming that Derek actively deceived her about his net worth, his property ownership, and his crushing credit card debt to trick her into a legally binding union. Derek ripped the paper off the door, his hands shaking. His 72-hour marriage was officially over. Jasmine, however, was not just handling the situation in the courtroom. She had a massive digital empire to protect. Her entire influencer brand was built on the image of luxury and high society. The abrupt cancellation of the Maldives honeymoon had already sparked rumors among her followers. She needed to control the narrative before the truth about her fraudulent marriage leaked out and destroyed her sponsorships. She needed a scapegoat, and she found 3 of them living in the townhouse she had just fled. That evening, Jasmine set up her professional ring light in the bedroom of her parents' house in Atlanta. She hit the record button and broadcasted a live video to her hundreds of thousands of followers. This time, there were no fake tears or smudged makeup. She looked fierce and completely ruthless. "I need to address the situation regarding my marriage," Jasmine announced, her voice echoing with righteous anger. "I know you all saw my previous video about my sister-in-law canceling our honeymoon. I thought she was just being petty and vindictive, but I was wrong. I was completely manipulated by a family of professional con artists. I am officially filing for an annulment because the man I married is a complete and utter fraud." Jasmine stared directly into the camera, dropping the ultimate bombshell on the internet. She exposed absolutely everything. She told her audience that Derek had secretly maxed out $70,000 in high-interest credit cards just to pay for his half of the wedding. She revealed that his parents, Richard and Susan, had been bankrupt for 5 years. She painted a vivid, humiliating picture of a family who leased luxury cars and bought designer clothes while secretly relying on their estranged daughter's charity just to keep a roof over their heads. "They do not even own the house they live in," Jasmine declared, her voice laced with heavy disgust. "The bank foreclosed on them years ago. They have been secretly renting their own house from Naomi for $500 a month. They lied to my family. They lied to me. They tried to use my platform and my success to elevate their fake social status while they were drowning in debt. I am sharing this because I refuse to let these financial parasites drag my name down." The video went nuclear. It was shared thousands of times within the first hour. Gossip blogs and drama channels immediately picked up the story, creating side-by-side compilations of my parents bragging at the country club, juxtaposed with Jasmine's brutal financial exposé. The comment sections were absolutely merciless. The internet, which had blindly attacked my corporate agency just days earlier, completely turned its collective fury onto Derek and my parents. They were branded as scammers, grifters, and the ultimate fake rich family. The real-world fallout was even more devastating. The video quickly circulated through my parents' affluent social circles. By Wednesday morning, Susan began receiving texts from her supposed friends at the country club. They were not messages of support. They were thinly veiled insults and sudden cancellations of upcoming social engagements. People they had spent decades trying to impress were now openly mocking them. The club board even sent Richard a firm email suggesting his membership would be suspended due to outstanding dues they suddenly realized he could no longer hide. Derek could not even dare to show his face at his entry-level office job. His co-workers had all seen the viral clips. The embarrassment was completely suffocating. In a matter of days, the golden child and his enabling parents had lost their home, their marriage, and every single ounce of their carefully manufactured public dignity. In a matter of days, the golden child and his enabling parents had lost their home, their marriage, and every single ounce of their carefully manufactured public dignity. On Thursday evening, I was sitting in my penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering city lights. I had just poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine and opened a new book when the secure intercom system mounted on my wall buzzed loudly. I walked over to the digital panel and pressed the video icon. The high-definition camera fed directly to my screen, showing the secure vestibule outside the heavy glass front doors of the building. Standing there huddled together in the cold night air were my parents. They looked absolutely unrecognizable. Susan was wearing a wrinkled oversized sweater and her face was puffy from days of relentless crying. Richard looked deeply aged, his posture completely hunched and defeated. The doorman had obviously refused to let them into the lobby, so they were buzzing my direct line from the exterior call box on the street. I pressed the audio button, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. "Yes," I said, staring at their pathetic image on the small screen. Naomi Susan gasped, her voice cracking with sheer desperation the very moment she heard me speak. "Please let us upstairs. Please just buzz us into the lobby. It is freezing out here and we have absolutely nowhere else to go tonight." "Where is Derek?" I asked. "He is sleeping in his car," Richard answered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "We had to leave the townhouse early. The commercial developer sent an early inspection team today, and the reality of the demolition finally broke him completely. We spent all day going to different leasing offices, but nobody will take us. Our credit is completely ruined from the bankruptcy and the debt. We are going to be living on the literal street. Please let your mother and me sleep on your couch tonight." I watched them on the screen. The people who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small were now begging for a tiny corner of my living room. I just felt completely indifferent to their suffering because they had engineered every single second of it themselves. "I am sorry, Richard," I said, maintaining an incredibly polite but detached tone. "But my penthouse has a very specific aesthetic, and I am afraid having two broke squatters sleeping on my couch simply does not fit the high society vision I have curated for my home. You sitting up here looking miserable is going to bring down the energy of my space." Susan let out a loud, wailing sob, pressing her face against the cold glass of the lobby door. "Naomi, please," she begged, her voice muffled by the thick glass. "We are your real family now. You cannot do this to your own parents. We raised and loved you. You raised me to be a financial safety net," I corrected her firmly. "You raised me to be the invisible sister who pays the bills while you shower Derek with endless affection. But you officially revoked my family status last Friday night, remember? You sat at the rehearsal dinner and watched Jasmine ban me from the wedding. I believe your exact words were that Jasmine's family is important, and we need to make a good impression. You told me I was just the sister and I needed to learn my place." "We were wrong," Richard sobbed, leaning heavily against the metal intercom box. "We were so wrong, Naomi. We were blinded by our own pride and arrogance. An apology born out of desperation is not an apology." I replied, my voice completely devoid of pity. "It is just a manipulation tactic to get back into my wallet. You said her parents were very important members of the community in Atlanta who had connections that could help Derek. Give Jasmine's parents a call and see if they will let you sleep on their couch." Naomi Susan shrieked, her voice echoing loudly through the small microphone. "You know they hate us. Jasmine exposed us to the entire internet. Her family wants absolutely nothing to do with us. We have nobody left in the world. Then I suggest you get comfortable in Derek's car, I said smoothly. Because you are not coming up here, and you are never getting another dime from me. Do not ever try to come to my building again. If you ring this buzzer one more time, I will have the doorman call the police and have you formally arrested for trespassing. I reached out and pressed the disconnect button. The video feed immediately went black, cutting off Susan's desperate screaming. The huge apartment was perfectly quiet once again. 4 weeks passed in a blur of corporate meetings and unbothered peace. The 28-day deadline imposed by the commercial developers arrived with the brutal efficiency of a ticking clock. I woke up early that morning, poured my artisanal coffee into a travel mug, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. I did not drive to my agency. Instead, I drove straight to Elm Street. I parked my sleek black sedan down the block, pulling under the shade of a large oak tree. I kept the engine running, and the tinted windows rolled up, allowing me to observe the street in complete anonymity. I sat back in the leather driver's seat and watched the final act of my family's manufactured tragedy unfold. A small, battered rental moving truck was backed into the driveway. It was a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles that usually occupied that space. Derek was walking out of the heavy oak front door carrying a sagging cardboard box. He was completely alone. Jasmine was long gone back to her influencer life in Atlanta, fighting her annulment battle through her attorneys. My parents were nowhere to be seen, likely hiding their shame in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, refusing to show their faces in the neighborhood they used to rule. Derek looked physically exhausted. His expensive tailored clothes were replaced by stained sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. The arrogant posture of the golden child had completely collapsed. He struggled to lift the heavy box into the back of the truck, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his new reality. He had no friends to help him move. The people he used to party with at the country club had entirely cut ties the moment the viral video exposed his financial ruin. He was experiencing the absolute isolation of a man who had burned every single bridge he ever walked across. Just as he walked back inside the townhouse, a fleet of heavy commercial vehicles turned onto the quiet suburban street. 2 large flatbed trucks carrying chain-link construction fencing parked right in front of the property lawn. Men in bright neon safety vests and hard hats poured out of the vehicles. They did not wait for Derek to finish packing. They immediately began driving steel posts deep into the perfectly manicured grass enclosing the entire perimeter of the property. The visual was incredibly striking. The fortress of my childhood, the very house where my parents had cultivated their lies and nurtured their golden child, was being systematically cordoned off like a hazardous waste site. Derek came back out carrying a black trash bag filled with loose clothes. He stopped on the front porch staring at the construction workers erecting the metal barrier around him. One of the foremen approached the porch holding a heavy clipboard. I cracked my window just a fraction to hear the exchange. The foreman politely but firmly informed Derek that the property was now an active commercial demolition zone and he had exactly 1 hour to surrender the keys and vacate the premises before the perimeter gates were permanently padlocked. Derek nodded weakly. He did not argue. He did not threaten to call his father or hire a lawyer. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He simply threw the trash bag into the back of the rental truck and pulled down the heavy metal door. He walked around to the driver's side, his head bowed in total defeat. He climbed into the cab and started the engine. The truck sputtered to life, coughing a cloud of dark exhaust into the crisp morning air. He slowly pulled out of the driveway, driving right past my parked car without even looking in my direction. He was completely invisible to the wealthy neighbors who were peering through their living room curtains, watching the spectacle of the neighborhood frauds finally being cast out. I watched the taillights of his truck disappear around the corner, heading toward whatever cheap studio apartment he had managed to secure. Once he was gone, a massive yellow excavator rolled off a flatbed trailer, its heavy metal treads violently crushing the brick walkway that led to the front door. The massive mechanical arm swung upward, casting a long shadow over the roof. I watched the heavy machinery systematically tear into the front wall of the living room, ripping away the brick and exposing the empty interior. The physical structure was being brutally torn apart, but I felt no sadness. The toxic family structure that had trapped me for decades had already been completely demolished. I put my car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the rubble exactly where it belonged. I put my car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the rubble exactly where it belonged. Exactly 1 month later, I woke up to the gentle sound of clear waves lapping against the wooden stilts of a luxurious overwater villa. I stepped onto the expansive teak deck and let the warm breeze of the Indian Ocean wash over me. The water stretched out a vibrant shade of turquoise, glowing under the sun. I was in the Maldives. I was happily occupying the exact presidential suite I originally booked and paid for to celebrate my brother's wedding. When the cancellation policies dictated the massive payment was non-refundable, I simply transferred the entire itinerary into my name. I decided to treat myself to the ultimate luxury vacation as a reward for breaking free. I walked over to the plush sunbed and sat down, picking up a glass of tropical juice. Next to the glass sat my smartphone. It was delightfully silent. Over the past 4 weeks, I executed a complete communication blackout with my parents and brother. I changed my phone numbers, updated my email addresses, and instructed my corporate staff to reject any contact attempts. The transition was astonishingly easy. Once you remove the people who only reach out to demand your money, the resulting quiet is absolutely beautiful. I did not know where Richard and Susan were living, and I genuinely did not care. I did not know how Derek was handling his crushing debt or the incredibly public annulment Jasmine dragged him through. Those emergencies were no longer my responsibility. For my entire life, my family demanded that I learn my place. They told me my place was in the shadows, working tirelessly to fund their carefully curated aesthetic. Well, I finally learned my place. My place was halfway across the world, enjoying a breathtaking ocean view financed entirely by my own hard work. Many people in our modern society view family estrangement as a massive and heartbreaking tragedy. We are conditioned to believe we must forgive every transgression and endure endless disrespect simply because we share blood. People will tell you that holding firm boundaries makes you a bitter person. But sitting here on this beautiful island, looking at the endless horizon, I can honestly tell you there is absolutely no tragedy in walking away from abusers. There is no nobility in allowing toxic people to destroy your mental health and drain your bank accounts just because they are related to you. Family is supposed to be a safe harbor. If your family is a sinking ship operated by arrogant people who demand you drown so they can stand on your shoulders to breathe, you have every right to swim away. Cutting off toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is your absolute birthright to protect your own peace. For decades, I desperately believed that if I just solved enough of their problems, they would finally love and respect me. I chased their conditional approval until it exhausted my spirit. But the moment they handed me that dinner bill and banished me from the wedding, I saw the truth with crystal clarity. Their love was never going to be real. It was strictly transactional. The second I stopped funding the transaction, the illusion shattered completely. I lost a family that never existed, but I gained my entire life back. I gained my total freedom and absolute self-respect. I slowly stood up and walked to the edge of the wooden deck, looking down at the brightly colored tropical fish swimming peacefully through the clear water. I felt an incredible sense of lightness in my chest. I had successfully demolished the toxic foundation of my past, and I was finally building my future on solid ground. If you are watching this and you are trapped in a cycle of family abuse or financial manipulation, please hear me right now. You do not owe abusers your loyalty. You do not owe them your success. You are allowed to walk away and never look back. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please let me know in the comments below if you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your own peace. Tell me how your life changed after you finally walked away. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your personal power. Remember, your peace of mind is the most valuable asset you will ever own, and absolutely no one in this world has the right to take it from you. I will see you in the next video with another empowering story. The most profound lesson we can take from this story is that shared blood is never a valid excuse for ongoing disrespect. For far too long, society has pushed the dangerous narrative that family means unconditional tolerance. We are taught to absorb insults, endure emotional manipulation, and quietly sacrifice our own resources to fix other people's deliberate mistakes simply because they share our last name. But this story brilliantly shatters that toxic myth. True empowerment begins the moment you understand that your peace of mind and financial stability are not bargaining chips. You do not have to buy temporary affection from people who only view you as a convenient safety net. For years, the protagonist funded a manufactured illusion for a family that fundamentally looked down on her. She stayed quiet to keep the peace until she finally realized the peace she was keeping was destroying her own soul. When she bravely stopped paying the maintenance fee for their lies, their entire fake empire immediately collapsed. This teaches us a powerful reality about the nature of personal boundaries. A boundary is completely useless if you lack the courage to emotionally and legally enforce it. Walking away from a toxic family structure is never an act of cruelty or a bitter revenge plot. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is the necessary process of reclaiming your life from those who feel absolutely entitled to consume it. When you sever the invisible strings of guilt and obligation, you finally give yourself permission to truly thrive. You are completely allowed to protect your energy, your hard-earned assets, and your mental health, even if it means leaving your childhood home behind. Please share this reflection with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about reclaiming your personal power.